Okay, so since my last video that I had on this tabletop, things have changed. My wife got involved and she wanted to do things a little bit different. I was going to build chairs for it. I still will build 2 chairs for each end, but she thought since we are going to put it in our cabin, it'd be nice to have a benches. So I built benches for it, as you can see. But let's talk about the table first. I redid the size of the table. She wanted it a little bit bigger for our cabin, so I did, because we do have 3 kids and 4 grandkids that will be coming up there, and countless precious nieces and nephews and brothers and sisters and stuff. So anyhow, so I did redo it because she said we'll be needing more room on the table. The tabletop itself is overall size is 40 inches by 60 inches, 40 inches wide, 60 inches long. The tabletop itself, the 2 by lengths that you see here, the dimensions lengths you see down the middle that form the most of the tabletop, the ones that run lengthways. Those were 2 by 12s that I trimmed down at my table saw to 2 by 10 so that they all fit uniformly in there. The breadboards were 2 by 10s that I trimmed down to 8 inches wide and put them at the end, as you can see. Now, one thing that I did do is I put pennies down between the seam. I routed out, took a 3/4 inch router, routed out to about 1/8 of an inch depth, and I plunge routed it out across the width of where the breadboard meets the tabletops, the ones that go lengthways. And so you can see the pennies. I put heads at this end, tails at the other. So I thought the grandkids would get a kick out of that. Everything is joined together with glue and biscuit joints. I did use pocket screws on the breadboards to join the breadboards to the main table top itself. I stained the tabletop. I put a pre-stain, a Minwax pre-stain on it. Then I did stain it with a dark walnut stain. I left it on a minimal amount of time because I didn't want the table too dark, but I did want to have it on there long enough to bring out the grain of the wood and darken it up a little bit. Now I did something that I've never done before on the tabletop. So the tabletop has an epoxy resin on it. I used Primalock epoxy resin and I put 2 flood coats on it. I did do a primer coat, a seal coat as they call it, to make sure that I was filling in any gaps, and I did that. Then I put 2 coats of the flood coat on it. So it's about a 1/4 inch thick, maybe a little bit less than a 1/4 inch, maybe 3/16, because it's supposed to self-level at 1/8 of an inch, but this video doesn't do it justice. It really pops. It's it looks like liquid glass on top of it. I've never done it before. It's really easy to do, and I think that this is something that almost anybody can do. It's quite simple. Just make sure you mix it right is the main thing. And so for the legs on this, they're 4x4s. I trimmed them down to the 4x4 comes in at a 3.5 by 3.5. I trimmed them down to 3 inches, and the legs themselves are on the table are 29 inches tall, and then the cross pieces that you see running across the full width between the braces, the cross pieces that run that full width, the support pieces are 47. There's 3 of them because there's 2, if I can get a picture of that run on each side across the full length to brace between the legs and the braces. 47 inches long. They were 2x4s that I went ahead and I cut them down to 3 inches on my table saw and squared them all up. Now the cross braces that you see here, I notched. These are 4x4s also that were trimmed down to 3 inches. I notched them. They're notched in and glued into the notches there. They are 26.5 inches across these cross braces. So that's basically the the build. Now the two top supports that run between the legs are 23 inches. So on each end and then across through the middle, I put two more, and they're 23 inches. So that's the cut pattern. 29-inch legs, 4x4, 26.5-inch 4x4 supports notched into the legs, 47-inch long cross supports that go in between the span of the legs, and then the cross bracing across the top of the legs and across between the spans of the 47-inch spans are 23 inches. I'll put a cut list at the end of this, but I think the table turned out really, really well. Again, there it goes. I didn't Primacoat the tops of the benches. I did that to kind of contrast it. I wanted it to on the benches to have a little contrast with the table, but I couldn't be happier with the way that this turned out. So about ready to take this over my storage shed. I'm gonna put this in the cabin that I haven't built yet. I will build 2 chairs, one for each side, to complete the entire set. But that's the table. Okay, now let's start talking about the benches. I really enjoyed making the benches. They were a lot of fun. They were very, very simple to make. Again, I joined all of these together with biscuit joints. I did on the breadboards where the breadboards connect to the main bench top itself to form that breadboard pattern on there. I did pocket screw those together. The benches themselves are 61.5 inches in length, total length, and they're 15 inches in width. Now, of that 61.5 inches in width, or in total length, the breadboards, I took 2x10s, cut them to 15 inches, then I trimmed them down to 8.5 inches on the breadboards. I connected them, like I said, with pocket screws to the main bench top. Now the main bench top itself, the boards are 44.5 inches long, and they I took 2x10s also, and I trimmed them down to 7.5 inches, and I joined them together with biscuit joints. I then applied, I did the same type of pre-staining as I did on the tabletop. I put a Minwax pre-stain on it, and then I went over it with the black walnut, and it really brought out the grain. I tried to find really good hard grain for the tabletops or the bench tops themselves so that it would pop. Like I said earlier, I didn't use the epoxy resin, the Primalock epoxy resin, and flood coat them. I just went ahead and I put 8 coats of Minwax wipe-on polyurethane, oil-based polyurethane on top of these. Everything that I used was oil-based, the stain and the polyurethane. I sanded with 220 all the way in between each coat, and again I put 8 coats on it. I find for me that it's easier to use the wipe-on poly than it is the brush-on poly. I used to paint houses years ago. I painted hundreds of houses, you know, when I was in high school and shortly thereafter as an occupation. But I'm using polyurethane. There's probably people that are a lot better at it than I am, but I couldn't keep the brush marks out of the final coat, so I went with the wipe-on. I struggle with the brush strokes even when I sand it. So let's talk about the underside of the benches themselves. I put this one on side. Now the legs of the benches are 2x4s. I trimmed them all down to 3 inches, and I joined them together with pocket screws. You'll see all the pocket screws underneath. Pocket screws are on top of here that were joined into the legs. Now the legs themselves are 17 inches long, so these legs are 17 inches long. I just made 2 boxes to start out with. The cross pieces are 10 inches long, and I pocket screwed them into the 17-inch long legs. There's a 3-inch rise for that bottom brace from the floor of the leg. And so I built the 2 boxes first, and then I built the cross pieces. These cross pieces that you see are 52 inches long. I did 3 of them, and I just pocket screwed them all together also, and just formed this bench frame for it that I put the bench top onto. You can see that I just took 2.5 inch screws and spaced them across there about every 10 inches to hold the bench top to the bench frame itself. Very, very simple design. Anybody can do this. If you've got a saw, you've got a drill, you can build these. And then that's just the final product that I got. I'll try to get a shot of the underside of the table also, so that you can see how it's put together. As I already have that earlier in the shoot, but there's what it looks like underneath there. I did sand down the underside of all of these because I have grandkids crawling around and I didn't want them to get any slivers. The sanding that I used on everything, I started out with 80 grit sandpaper after I joined everything together and clamped it all together and let it dry. I used 80 grit sandpaper on everything. And I worked my way from 80 to 100 to 150 to 220. And my final sanding before I went ahead and did the pre-staining and the staining on all this was I did a hand stain or a hand sanding with 400 grit sandpaper and my hand block sander. So a lot of sanding went into it. I think I got the most out of all this. The most expensive thing was it was about $200 that I spent on the Primal lock. And then of course all these pennies. Good grief, there must be $2 worth of pennies in these in here. The lumber I just got at Home Depot and trimmed it down, and I think I have about $150 in lumber and other supplies too. So total cost on this was about $350 to $400, but I am really, really, really happy with it. Next stop is the shed. I didn't screw the top to the framework, the table yet, because I want to store this away, and then when I move it, after I move it into our cabin, I'll screw the tabletop to the framework. But again, you can do this. I can do this. You can do this if you got a table saw, a skill saw, and just a little time and effort. Okay, thanks for watching.